Hey everyone, welcome back to Building Thinkers. Today we're diving into the art and science of creativity, and more specifically, how to infuse creative thinking into your life, work, and organization. I'm joined by Cyndi Burnett, a creativity specialist who has spent the past 25 years studying, teaching, and writing about creative thinking. Cyndi is also the co-author of several books, including Weaving Creativity into Every Strand of Your Curriculum, Infusing Creative Thinking into Higher Education. Wait, I've got that one here. And My Sandwich is a Spaceship. Okay, I've got to get this one. My Sandwich is a Spaceship, Creative Thinking for Parents and Young Children. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Women's Health Magazine, and Women's World Magazine. In addition to her writing and teaching, Cyndi co-hosts a podcast, a YouTube channel, and leads professional development experiences for educators around the world. Welcome, Cyndi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Tracy.
Will you tell our audience what is it that you build?
I build creative content for educators that teach young students all the way up to graduate students. I build content that helps them integrate creative thinking into any classroom. And so I do that with my podcast. I do that with my YouTube videos. I do that with my books. So I'm a content creator that specializes in bringing creativity into the classroom with a particular passion for bridging the gap between research and practice, because I think there's a lot of amazing researchers in the field of creativity, and there's a lot of amazing educators, but they don't often talk to each other. So that's one of the pieces that I particularly love to build.
I wanted to start us off as we're thinking about creativity with a couple definitions. So Dorothy Parker says, creativity is a wild mind and a disciplined eye. And then I shared that I was rereading The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, and he says, the ability to look deeply is the root of creativity, to see past the ordinary and mundane and get to what might otherwise be invisible. And I want to know, Cyndi, what do you think about the definition of creativity? What does it mean to you?
Well, I do actually have a definition of creativity, and it is that creative thinking is more than just coming up with new ideas. It's about living a life in a way that is open, authentic, and curious. And it's a mindset and approach to everything we do.
Oh, I love it. Okay, let's go right into that. I want to think about this. What strikes me in your definition is this way of being and living. And so whereas maybe other areas of life or productivity or different skills and competencies might be more contained somehow, it seems to me like creativity itself is uncontainable. And so it's part of a way of being as you describe it. So how have you seen that to be true in your work in creativity?
So Tracy, let's start at the beginning. So my background is actually in the performing arts. And way back in the 1990s, I obtained my BFA in musical theater, and I went on to perform in a Broadway show. So I toured 89 cities and came off the tour with my equity card. And when I left tour, I realized I didn't want to perform anymore, that I didn't enjoy it. And so through a series of serendipitous events, I found myself sitting in a graduate course on creativity in my hometown of Buffalo, New York, because I was sort of thrown into this course. Like I said, it was like a day, and I was sitting in a graduate class because they happened to be starting up. And someone said, this is the science of creativity. And I was like, the science of creativity? Isn't creativity about like creating art? Like that's how I was creative. And they said, no, this is about sort of the cognitive, it was like the formal cognitive, rational, semantic approach to creativity. So I went on to get my master's degree, and it was a Master of Science in Creativity and Change Leadership. And right after I graduated, which was in 2001, I had been brought on to start teaching undergraduates as a part-time job. So I spent most of my first 10 years in the field of creativity trying to bridge the gap. And I finally found this article that was in the Cambridge Handbook of Creativity, written, the edited collection was by Kaufman and Sternberg, two eminent researchers in the field of creativity. And there was this article by Moran, and it talked about creativity in two perspectives. One is improving on things, which is like the scientific perspective. And the other is on the artistic expressive side of creativity, which I loved. And I was like, yeah, that's it. But that's just a very simple framework with it that says what I'm seeing. But how do we make that bridge? And the bridge actually came from the work of E. Paul Torrance. For me, the bridge that I made. And this work by E. Paul Torrance, who was known as the father of creativity and education, he talked all about these skills of beyonders. And beyonders are people who went beyond in their fields. And he talked about 20 different skills. So as I started to explore these skills, which included things like keeping open and coming up with lots of ideas, coming up with original ideas, that was the language, these 20 skills, that I could bridge this gap between the science and the art of creativity. And so that's what I've spent the last 15 years of my career building, is resources around those 20 skills.
So let's think about our potential listeners, many of whom are entrepreneurs or, working in organizations in which they are at this moment in time, perhaps recognizing the vital need for creativity. Why, in this moment in time, is understanding and potentially developing the skills of creativity so vital in your perspective?
Well, if we take it from the scientific perspective and we're looking at deliberate problem solving, I think having a toolbox of things that we can pull out that will help us be more creative in our lives and be able to be better problem solvers. I'm working with a university in California right now, and they were asking me about what would be the impact of teaching creativity to our undergraduate science students. And I said, well, it's really the ability to navigate change. So understanding these cognitive tools and really clarifying problems and generating new ideas and developing solutions, these tools can really help you navigate those complex problems. I think on the artistic side of things and the expressive side of things, having moments where we can express ourselves in meaningful ways is really helpful to our health and wellness. So you mentioned I have a podcast called Fueling Creativity and Education. We've interviewed over 120 of the leading scholars and practitioners and educators in the field of creativity. And the one thing that I keep coming out with is the benefits of overall well-being by being creative. And so I think it's a lot about that. I think the other piece is about building creative confidence and knowing that you can solve problems as they arise. And I think at this moment in history, so we are talking, it's June 5th and 2025, that we can guarantee that there's going to be a lot of changes coming forward, especially with the onset of generative AI, and that we can use our problem-solving abilities to work through those challenges. And then we can find ways that we can express ourselves in meaningful ways to help us with our overall health and well-being, which I think has been an issue for, we could say of all time, right? I don't think health and well-being is something that's just new, right?
Right.
But there is, there have been books coming out recently around, the anxious generation and our young students who are coming out of the pandemic and not really able to communicate with one another well. So finding ways in which they can communicate and express themselves with each other, I think is a really powerful piece.
I love how breaking it down into the science and art just brings so much multi-dimensionality maybe to creativity, to not only see it in this as one way and kind of this toggling back and forth between having that understanding. Another piece from the creative act that I thought I might read that might prompt some discussion is in his chapter about patience. So I'm going to read this short part and I want to dig into it. I think it's going to hit on this wellness side. Okay. He says, there are no shortcuts. The lottery winner isn't ultimately happy after their sudden change of fortune. The home built hastily rarely survives the first storm. The single sentence summary of a book or news event is no substitute for the full story. We often take shortcuts without knowing it. When listening, we tend to skip forward and generalize the speaker's overall message. We miss the subtleties of the point, if not the entire premise. In addition to the assumption that we are saving time, this shortcut also avoids the discomfort of challenging our prevailing stories, and our worldview continues to shrink. The artist actively works to experience life slowly. and then to re-experience the same thing anew, to read slowly, and to read again. Patience is required for the nuanced development of your craft. Patience is required for taking in information in the most faithful way possible. Patience is required for crafting a work that resonates and contains all that we have to offer. It struck me because sometimes I go rather fast. I like to get a lot of things done. I
Mhm.
wrestle with overachieving productivity and identify as a recovering perfectionist. I've done much work internally to
Mhm.
understand the roots for me of some of those tendencies and how those adaptations no longer serve me. However, thinking about patience in this way, thinking about what is possible to offer to the world with that slowness amidst a world that's so busy. I'm curious your thoughts about patience, about slowness, and what any of that has to do with creativity, if any of that struck you.
One of the skills in the 20 skills, which is I call it a contemporary skill, it's mindfulness and being in the present moment. And I think there is an openness and curiosity when it comes to mindfulness and seeing things that we may not have seen before. And I do a really simple activity when I work with people for the first time around curiosity, and I give them a pencil. And I say, okay, how long have you been holding this pencil for? And typically they say, since I was 4 or 5 years old. Okay, so have you ever stopped to really ask questions about a pencil? Well, that's what we're going to do. And then I usually have them spend 5 minutes generating as many questions as they can about a pencil. And I think it goes to that point of really being in the present moment and becoming curious about what's around us and seeing those things. You mentioned seeing the familiar stranger. It reminds me of synectics, which is a very
Mm.
popular problem-solving methodology, which talks about making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. I think there's definitely a piece of that, but I think it's more complex than that as well.
Mhm.
So I think yes, being patient as you're going through the creative process, but when I'm working with students
Mm.
around creativity, I really focus in on the emotions that come with it. There's so many emotions that come into the creative process. There's so many emotions you're dealing with when you're dealing with problem solving. Yes, patience is a piece, but really allowing ourselves to tolerate ambiguity when we're in a creative process, whether it be, you're creating something as an artist, or, you're an entrepreneur and
Mm.
you're trying to work through, like, why is this not sticking, or why aren't people buying this?
Mhm.
Or whether or not you're an educator and your students just aren't getting it. You have to be able to trust yourself and tolerate that
Mhm.
ambiguity and embrace that challenge. And it's not an easy thing to do. And so
Mhm.
often we rush to help people because we don't want them to feel like, oh, we don't want our students to feel, because I work mostly with educators, we don't want our students to feel bad about that.
Mm.
We don't want our students to be suffering through this learning, but actually that's part of the process.
Yeah.
That's part of life, is the
Mhm.
struggle.
Right.
Productive struggle
Productive.
is a part of life. It
Yeah.
builds resilience. It makes us better
Mm.
humans. It shows us how strong and capable we are as people, as
Mm.
creators.
Mm.
So if you look at, like, how can I get through this? Well, it's through that productive struggle. So once you work through that and you get to that other side, you go,
I
I
did
got
it.
this. I did
Yeah,
it.
I did it and I can do it again. Cindy, it's
Yes.
making me think about for our students and for ourselves and just the nature of being human, this recurring cycle. So to your point of confidence, it builds that. I'm thinking of research from Suzanne Hiller, who talks
Mhm.
about self-regulation and the connection between self-regulation, motivation, and achievement. And she
Mm.
says that if you have a student who is unmotivated, but you can get them to self-regulate
Mhm.
and build that, how is it going? How am I doing?
Yep.
And, through things like the goal setting process, working with a mentor, seeing that, I
Mhm.
can make that progress, that motivation and achievement increase when we build and it's a teachable
Mm.
skill. And so when you were talking about tolerating ambiguity, is that a teachable skill? And how might we think about building that?
I think it is a skill you can build that you can be more aware of. I think
Mhm.
the sort of meta thinking around ambiguity is helpful. So, understanding those moments, you're like, oh God, I hate this because I'm not good at tolerating ambiguity, but I'm going to wait and I'm going to give it a day and I'm going to be patient. That's where that patience piece comes in. I'm going to be patient and I'm going to trust that the answer will come to me tomorrow. One of the things that I used to do in an online course I taught, I had an assignment each week. It was called Tolerance of Ambiguity. So it was the TOA assignment. It was a distance course on current issues in creativity research. And because it was a current issues course, I would say, okay, each week when you open up this folder, and again, a distance course, you're going to find a 20-minute assignment and you're not going to know what it is until you open up the folder each week. And they would never know what that assignment was going to be. So it could be like, watch this video, or it could be, but it was always something that was happening in the field.
Yeah.
And I would do things to make the tolerance of ambiguity assignment, TOA assignment, funny. So I don't know if you've heard of the website Fiverr, but you can get people to do things for, $5. So it was like the voice of, someone pretending to be the voice of Santa Claus or Morgan Freeman. So I would hire them to go, okay, read this assignment out and have them do this. And then all of a sudden they would open up this TOA folder and it would be like Morgan Freeman's pretend voice saying, or ho, 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 here's what Cyndi wants you to do today.
Oh my goodness. I love this.
Sometimes the way to build that ambiguity is to build in a little element of fun surprise.
Cyndi, okay, I'm wondering if we can go into AI. There's exponential growth in what AI is capable of doing. This is the worst AI we will ever have because it will only continue to get better exponentially. With that in mind, I think a lot of people are wrestling with, what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean specifically to be a creative human? And so let's add this layer of, in light of AI being able to technically create its own works of art, is that creativity? What is the place for humans in partnership with AI? And what might be worth staying separate as human creativity and AI functionality?
First of all, I think that when we use AI, it can complement the work that we're doing and the work that we're creating. So now I'm working on the next book I'm working on. And I talked with the publisher about using AI, and they said, as long as it's, still in your voice and it's your content, you can use it to refine things. So how amazing is it when I can't get the exact words out and I type them into, ChatGPT, and I say, okay, this is what I want to say. What are the different ways I can say it? And I go, oh, that's the way I want to say it. I like that frame. There aren't as many creative blocks, so you can work through things much more quickly. So I think we will produce things and create things much more quickly. I don't think art is going to go away. I think we are still going to be creators because that is what we are. We are, as human beings, we have been creating since the beginning of time. And so to say like, oh, we're not going to create anymore, I think that would do terrible things to our health.
Right.
I think we're going to be able to do work much more quickly and maybe give us more time to do the things that we're really passionate about. So I'm really focused on that, developing that in my world than I am like, oh no, now I'm not going to be able to do anything because AI is going to do everything. So I really think that if we look at it as sort of a buddy to help us as we create. So, does that put some people out of work? Yes, it will, unfortunately. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat this. There will be work that shifts. So I hope that people aren't out of jobs. I think the jobs will just shift. And I think this is where creativity really comes into play because we are navigating just a huge time of change. Let's go into sciences. If we give students the ability to really use AI as a partner, then we can make scientific breakthroughs, that we can help identify challenges that people have that have like a disease that may only be 1 in a million people. But now we have access to this database that really can shape a better future for us if used in ethical ways.
Do we need to think differently about the skills and competencies and ways of thinking that our students need to have in order to work with AI?
So I really think, Tracy, that we could use the skills to enhance our work with AI. Let's just take, for example, we're teaching a lesson on biology and we want to get students to, one of the skills is risk taking. How can we get them to practice risk taking while they're learning about biology?
Mhm.
And all of a sudden it will just craft a lesson for you. And then it doesn't make you say, okay, I'm going to do that lesson, but maybe it gets you to go, oh, you know what I could do in my class that I never thought about.
Right.
And suddenly you've got new ideas. And
Mhm.
so I think if we think about some of the skills, like looking at things from different perspectives, it can really help you stretch your thinking if you use it appropriately.
Cyndi, may you take us into your creativity framework and walk us through those steps and how folks might be able to apply that in their work?
So the first step is to understand what creativity is and what it
Mhm.
isn't and why it's important. If you don't have that awareness and that common language,
Mhm.
then you're not going to have creativity in your organization. Now,
Mm.
many organizations, I will say, especially in the business side of things, we'll talk about innovation all day long. We're innovative. We're innovative. Do you know what innovative actually means? That's another piece of really understanding
Mhm.
what creativity is, because ultimately you don't have innovation unless you have creativity. So making sure you understand that. The second
Mhm.
step is really to model creative behavior. So if
Mm.
in your organization you want creativity, you need to model the way. So, when I work with educators, they'll say, "Well, what do our students need to do?" I'm like, "Okay, let's talk first about what you need to do." Because if you're not modeling creativity as a leader in your organization and whatever that looks like, then people are not going to follow. So what does that look like? It,
Mm.
it looks like you're open to new ideas. It looks like you're sharing your mistakes and failures, that you're taking risks and sometimes they don't work, that you're curious about what other people,
Mhm.
the other ideas that people have. The
Mm.
third part is around supporting an environment for creativity. And there's both the psychological environment and the physical environment. And what I'm mostly focused on is the psychological environment,
Mm.
because the psychological environment is a place where there's trust and safety and being open to new ideas. So if we are in an environment together and you're sharing ideas with me and I'm saying, no, we've done that. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
that won't work. We've tried that. We tried that about 5 years ago. Like, that is a negative creative environment. And so if you want creativity in your organization, you have to have a climate for creativity. Now, that doesn't mean everything has to be, oh, I love that idea. I love
Mhm.
that idea. We have to do that idea. No, it does not mean that. It just means that you're open
Mhm.
to listening to new ideas. And that when you hear an idea you don't like, you don't say, I don't like it. We've done that before. You say, okay, tell me more about this. The fourth piece is around integrating creative thinking into what we do. So in business, what does that look like? That might look like, we're going to look at things from different perspectives. We're going to try to come up with one new original idea every week. Playfulness and humor is an easy one that
Mhm.
builds on both the creative environment as well as integrating it into the
Ooh.
environment.
I'm hearing in this piece like a rhythm, a routine, habits. Is
Yes.
that a piece of it? Okay.
And the final piece is deliberately teaching for creativity. And
Mhm.
what that might look like in education, that looks like, bringing a creative problem solving course into the
Mhm.
content that you're teaching. It might be in a business situation. It might be actually having a professional development day where you're doing a design
Mhm.
thinking sprint, or you're learning about synectics, or you all bring in new ideas and you sit around and you generate more ideas of ways to improve your creative
Mm.
environment or the products that you sell, or whatever the case is. So that final piece is about making time for creativity.
Mm. One of the things that was striking me as I was thinking about all those steps is how creating space for creativity and like nurturing this culture has so many positive ripple effects. And there is this sense of people that are involved in the space to me of creativity and innovation, and maybe tangential work seem happier.
I mean, there's a lot of psychological benefits of being creative, and even just being in a culture and a climate
Mhm.
and working with you. I said we were like kindred spirits right from the get go, because we could both come up with lots of ideas and go, oh yeah, we could do this.
Yeah.
Oh, what if we did this? Oh, what if we did this? And there's something exciting about that. There's so much power in those
Mhm.
possibilities of, like, this could turn into something, right?
Yes.
Even if it doesn't, even if
Okay.
it doesn't turn
Yes.
into
This
something.
is naming what I was getting at exactly. These possibilities and hope. I think that it, again, like it would be easy. We could be glass half full in the state of the world right now. And there are many things to be
Yes.
upset about and to have collective grief and trauma around.
Yes.
And I think everybody has to for themselves choose their way forward. And the way that I think I could perhaps speak for both of us in this is that
Mhm.
being able to see and create the possibilities in our work and the people that we work with and the things that we decide to put out into the world allows us to make that choice on the path that we want to walk. And there is something very hopeful in that.
I agree.
Cyndi, one of the frames and sentence stems we like to use is if only people knew. So when it comes to creativity and the things we've been talking about, what would you say if only people knew?
I would say that if only people knew that creativity brings so much value into our lives, into our organizations, and into our world. If we can work together and solve problems by solving problems creatively,
Mm.
if we can express ourselves in ways that are meaningful to us, I think we're overall going to be happier people, and we're going to be able to navigate the complexity of what's
Mm.
to come much more effectively.
So how has pursuing creativity, researching it, teaching it, living it, how has it changed the way that you live?
If we look at creativity as generating something new, it always gives me an opportunity to look for something new. It also gives me a way out. So when I told my story earlier on today about, coming off of a Broadway tour, I was in a very dark place in my life. And I felt like I was just at a dead end. And
Mm.
I feel like when I learned about creativity, it just opened up a world of possibilities for me to explore, to have that hope,
Mm.
and to see things in different ways. And so even now when I'm faced with a challenge, I'm like, okay, there's going to be a way out of this. I just need to
Mm.
trust it. When you follow that passion and when you follow that active creation, you can find your way and trust that it will emerge in the way that it needs to.
It's been so powerful to work together, to speak together today. Thank you for giving such beautiful language to the science and the art of creativity. Thank you for really opening our eyes to what creativity can be. And I'm so excited to continue to stay connected and work together.
Yeah, me too.
And thank you so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review us and share it with a friend. Until next time.